He might have been controversial, but Marcus Garvey was, without a doubt, a great man. We have already seen different parts of his life and what he did. His works for the upliftment of Black people were remarkable, and to date, he remains regarded as one of the most prominent pan-Africanists to ever walk the earth. Still, Marcus couldn't have done all he did on his own. He had the support of several strong women with him. In this video, we'll shed a spotlight on them. These are Amy Ashwood, Amy Jacques, and Henrietta Davis, 3 Pan-African trailblazers. We'll be starting our roundup with Amy Ashwood. She was the first wife of Marcus Garvey, but we can remember her as a strong Pan-Africanist leader. Born in Port Antonio, Jamaica on January 10, 1897, Amy Ashwood was the only daughter of 3 children. As a child, Amy was told that she was of both Ashanti and Indian descent, so she was conscious of her relationship with Africa from childhood. She spent some of her formative years in Panama, but she eventually came back to Jamaica in 1904. In 1914, Marcus Garvey was returning to Jamaica after 2 years in London. Just 1 month later, he started the Universal Negro Improvement Association, an African Communities League. There are different versions of Amy during the beginning of the UNIA, but there is no doubt that she played an important role since the early days of the organization. Indeed, Amy Ashwood launched the UNIA-ACL with financial aid by borrowing money from her parents to print the flyers for the initial meeting. At the age of 17, Amy wrote romantic letters to Marcus in which she said, quote, "Our joint love for Africa and our concern for the welfare of our race urged us to immediate action," end quote. She served as the first General Secretary of the UNIA, and she was also a member of the association's management board. During this time, Amy's job was to organize the association's women's section. She started the Women's League of the UNIA and secured positions for women on the association's branch executives. She moved to the United States in 1918, where she worked as Marcus's aide and as the secretary of the New York City branch. In the same year, Marcus and Amy established the Negro World newspaper under the UNIA-ACL. This weekly newspaper was distributed in over 40 countries. It spanned Africa, Europe, and the Americas. It has editions in 3 different languages: English, Spanish, and French. The newspaper published Afrocentric content. This was in line with Pan-Africanist ideals. It played a major role in the Harlem Renaissance during the 1920s and 1930s. It also played a key role in the liberation of Africa. In fact, different African countries were European colonies at that time. They forbade it for its anti-colonial content. People like Kwame Nkrumah and Jomo Kenyatta played a leading role in their country's independence. They said they were influenced by the Negro world. Amy was also the secretary of the Black Star Line. It was a shipping company owned and operated only by Black people. While working as the Black Star Line's secretary, Amy and Marcus decided to tie the knot and make their marriage official. They married in December 1919, but sadly, things didn't last between them. By 1922, Amy and Marcus went their separate ways. However, Amy continued to work as a Pan-Africanist. She was also a politician and cultural feminist. Her work gained huge fame in the United States, Jamaica, and England. Even though she was no longer married to Marcus, Amy had become famous. She had used her fame to become a top advocate for women's rights. She actively tried to unite Kwame Nkrumah and his vocal dissident, the Ghanaian politician J.B. Dankwa, whom she had met during her stay in London. She encouraged Jamaican citizens to pursue a radical political education. Furthermore, Amy encouraged sex education for the Jamaican people. She often called for a women's political movement. It would be like the ones emerging across America. They aimed to boost female representation in local politics. In the twilight of her life, Amy actually did her best to connect to her roots. She remembered being told by her grandmother that she had descended from Dwaban, an Assanite city-state in Ghana. She eventually went there in an attempt to get back to her cultural roots. In fact, Amy even took the cultural name Akosua Boama. Her health started to fail. After visiting countries in Africa, Europe, and the Caribbean, Amy returned to Jamaica in 1968. She died in Kingston the following year, at the age of 72. But Amy Ashwood was not the only Amy in Marcus's life. His second wife was Amy Jacques Garvey. She was also an impressive woman with a strong Pan-African heart. Born Amy Euphemia Jacques, Amy came into this life on December 21, 1895. She was born and raised in a middle-class family. At a young age, she was taught to play the piano, and she even took courses in music appreciation. She was also part of a small minority of Jamaican youth. They attended Wolmer's Schools, a prestigious institution in Jamaica at the time. Amy graduated from school and got some of the highest honors. She was eventually recruited to work at a law firm. Amy worked there for 4 years until her father passed away. She gained knowledge of the legal system and its inner workings. Following her work, Amy eventually moved to the United States in 1917. This was where she eventually became enthralled with the whirlwind of a man, Marcus Garvey. Reports indicate that after attending a conference held by Marcus, Amy was so moved by his words. She immediately began working for the UNIA. As a secretary, Amy also worked very closely with Marcus, primarily helping to handle the UNIA's legal efforts. At the same time, Amy also helped with publishing the Negro World newspaper in Harlem from its inception in 1918. The same newspaper that was established by Marcus Garvey and Amy Ashwood. Reports say Amy Jacques was Ashwood's childhood friend from Jamaica. She was also the chief bridesmaid for Marcus's first wedding to Amy Ashwood. She even traveled with the couple to Niagara Falls during their honeymoon. And when the two finally got divorced, Amy Jacques was right there to step in. By July 1922, she and Marcus officially tied the knot. Amy Jacques and Marcus went on with their union. They even had 2 children, Marcus Mosiah Garvey Jr. and Julius Winston Garvey. They were born in 1930 and 1933. Amy toured the country with her husband. She even spoke at different events. Still, she never tried to oppose a direct threat to Marcus or his position within the organization. The organization also began to focus on fighting sexism. Amy and many other women in the UNIA became even more invaluable to the organization. She supported her husband's ambitions and the UNIA, but she also began to focus on her own writings. They made her known in the Black community. In the Negro world, she'd have her own segment, Our Women and What They Think. There, she talked about the struggles of Black women in America. Amy emphasized the need for Black women to be educated in many aspects of life. This would create a brighter future for the next generation. They could live in a society where Black women aren't seen as less than others. Following Marcus's conviction of mail fraud in 1922, Amy actually took a leadership position in the UNIA. She continued his work. She raised money for Marcus's fund. She also edited and published the first and second volumes of the Philosophy and Opinions of Marcus Garvey. While doing this, she worked tirelessly with lawyers to free her husband. She also kept the UNIA moving forward by giving speeches and meeting with its leaders. With Marcus eventually getting deported in 1927, Amy returned to Jamaica. She stayed with him, raising their sons and taking care of the family until they moved to England in 1934. Even after Marcus died in 1940, Amy continued to keep up the struggle for Black nationalism and African independence. In November 1963, Amy visited Nigeria. She was a guest of Dr. Nnamdi Azikiwe, the nation's first president. In 1971, Amy was awarded the Musgrave Medal. Sadly, she passed away 2 years later, apparently from natural causes. She wasn't a romantic partner, but Henrietta Davis was key to expanding Marcus Garvey's work. He proclaimed her the greatest woman of the Negro race today. Henrietta was born in Baltimore on August 26, 1860. Her father died shortly after her birth. Within 6 months, her mother remarried to George A. Hackett. He was an influential person in Baltimore. He was a member of the Bethel African Methodist Episcopal Church. George had been working hard to defeat the 1859 Jacobs Bill. It was made to enslave the children of free African Americans and deport their parents from Maryland. Following his death in 1870, Henrietta and her mother eventually moved to Washington. At the young age of 15, Henrietta began working as a teacher at a public school in Maryland. In 1878, she became the first African American woman to be employed by the Office of the Recorder of Deeds in Washington, D.C. She worked here with noted abolitionist Frederick Douglass in 1881. She also had experience as a drama actress, which allowed her to travel and tour. It was on one of these tours that she would finally get the chance to realize her political activist career. While traveling in the Caribbean, Henrietta came in contact with the work of Marcus Garvey. On June 15, 1919, she was among the guests who spoke at a meeting of the UNIA held at the Palace Casino in Harlem, New York. Henrietta performed Little Brown Baby with Sparkling Eyes by Paul Laurence Dunbar. She loved the work and scope of the UNIA so much that she gave up her career to work with the organization. In her capacity, Henrietta made several prominent moves. For example, During the UNIA-ACL convention in August 1920, the members elected her as an international organizer. She also signed the Declaration of the Rights of the Negro Peoples of the World. She was the Black Star Line's second vice president. Also in 1920, she established the Black Cross Nurses in Philadelphia. It was an auxiliary of the Universal Negro Improvement Association and African Communities League. The model was based on the World War I nursing model of the Red Cross. Units quickly formed in cities across the United States. They also formed in the Caribbean and Central America. Then, in 1921, Henrietta rose to the rank of the 4th Assistant President General of the UNIA-ACL. In her role, she set up divisions in Cuba, Guadeloupe, and St. Thomas in the Virgin Islands. She also set up divisions in Port-au-Prince, Haiti, Trinidad and Tobago, and Jamaica. And even though Henrietta was unseated by Marcus in 1923, she was re-elected during the August 1924 convention. On August 25, 1924, Henrietta was the chairperson of the annual convention. She was the 4th assistant to the President General of the UNIA. In December of that year, she traveled to Liberia as the only woman in the UNIA delegation. They were seeking consent to establish themselves there. At the 1929 International Convention of the UNIA, Marcus had already been deported to Jamaica. The organization elected Henrietta as the General Secretary. She broke up with Marcus 2 years later. Then she became the first Assistant President General of the rival organization. In 1934, she was elected president, and she served in this capacity until 1940, when she retired. At the end of the day, Marcus Garvey couldn't have achieved everything he did without some major help. Amy Ashwood, Amy Jacques, and Henrietta Davis were 3 powerful pan-Africanist women who contributed to achieving the aims and objectives of the UNIA.